TIFU by accidentally sending a very personal message to my boss, and then trying to cover it up with an even worse idea. It all started with a typical day at work. I had just finished my morning coffee and was checking through my emails when I noticed an alert for a text from my best friend, Jake. We've been texting pretty much nonstop since college, and our conversations are usually a mix of memes, rants, and the occasional deep discussion about life. I'm a big fan of texting in the morning because I don't have to engage in small talk and can just focus on the real stuff. So I grabbed my phone, opened Jake's latest message, and saw he had sent a hilarious meme about my boss, Karen. Now, Karen is one of those people who thinks she's constantly in charge, even though everyone knows that the higher-ups think she's a bit of a joke. It's no secret that the office is full of Karen-related jokes, and Jake and I have been making fun of her for months. Jake's message had me in stitches. It was a perfectly timed meme featuring a photoshopped image of Karen as a tyrannical overlord demanding everyone bow down to her. It was ridiculously funny, and I immediately thought, I have to show this to Sarah. Sarah is one of my colleagues and a good friend, and we both share a similar sense of humor. I knew she'd die laughing at the meme, and I wanted to send it to her right away. I quickly opened our message thread and pasted the meme into the text box. However, because I was still laughing from the meme, I got a little cocky. I decided I'd add a quick comment along the lines of, yeah, Karen's probably in her office right now plotting how to make us all do more work while claiming she invented the concept of productivity. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was feeling pretty proud of myself for the zinger. I had no idea that I was on the verge of making one of the most cringe-worthy mistakes of my life. After sending the message to Sarah, I went back to the office emails, not even thinking about the fact that I had a new text waiting in my inbox. It was only about 5 minutes later, when I was reading through some documents, that I noticed I had a message from Karen, my actual boss. I quickly glanced at the message. It read, "Hey, could you please come to my office as soon as possible? We need to talk about your latest project." I immediately froze. You see, earlier in the day, Karen had sent a group message about a big project I was working on. I had accidentally missed one of her instructions, and now she was apparently not happy. Panic set in. I quickly started typing a response to her, trying to come up with an excuse for why I hadn't been able to follow through on everything she had requested. But as I was typing out the message, I was suddenly struck by a horrifying thought. What if my text about Karen had accidentally gone to her instead of Sarah? I grabbed my phone, heart pounding in my chest, and opened up the conversation with Sarah. I scrolled up, and then my stomach sank. I had sent that exact meme and the comment about Karen to the wrong person. Instead of sending it to Sarah, I had mistakenly sent it to Karen, my boss. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. My face went bright red, and my mind raced through the countless ways I could fix this. I could delete the message, but we all know that once you've sent something to someone, it's too late for that. The text was sitting there in her inbox, probably staring back at her like the unholy curse it was. I had to act fast. I immediately began typing out a desperate apology, trying to make it seem like I had made an innocent mistake. I wrote, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That message was meant for a friend. It was a joke, and I didn't mean it to go to you. Please don't take offense." After I sent that, I panicked even more. How could I possibly explain away the fact that I'd just made fun of her in such an immature and unprofessional way? I knew she was not the type to just brush it off. In fact, Karen was known for holding grudges and always bringing things up at the most awkward moments. In an effort to cover up the massive hole I had just dug for myself, I immediately started crafting a funny follow-up message to Karen. I thought, maybe if I go along with the joke, it'll soften the blow. I typed, Karen, I think you'd actually look pretty badass as a ruler. Maybe you should start wearing a crown around the office. I'll personally design it for you. As soon as I hit send, I regretted it. The follow-up message was even worse than the first one. Instead of trying to apologize properly, I was making more jokes and digging the hole even deeper. I could already hear the voice of my old college professor ringing in my head. Sometimes humor is the worst way to handle a bad situation. But it was too late to take it back. I sat there for a few minutes, agonizing over the fact that I had just completely ruined any hope of being taken seriously by Karen ever again. I imagined her storming out of her office to have a serious talk with me, or worse, dragging me into HR. Then I had an idea. A terrible, awful idea that would make everything so much worse, but I was desperate. Maybe if I just went to her office in person and acted like nothing was wrong, I could somehow talk my way out of it. I mean, what could possibly go wrong with that, right? I got up from my desk, straightened my tie, and walked down the hallway to Karen's office, trying to think of anything I could say to make the situation better. I knocked on the door and she called out, "Come in." When I entered, she was sitting at her desk, eyes glued to her computer screen. I could feel the tension in the air. She looked up at me and said, "So, what's this I hear about you making jokes at my expense?" I almost choked. It was official, I was a dead man walking. In a feeble attempt to salvage the situation, I blurted out, "I swear, Karen, I didn't mean any harm by it. It was just, I was joking with my friend, and it got mixed up. You know how things can get, right?" Karen raised an eyebrow and put her hands on the desk, still looking at me with a look that could have frozen lava. "I see. Well, if you think this is funny, we can discuss it further after you finish your project. I suggest you get back to work." I nodded, my face burning with embarrassment. I quickly exited her office, but not before hearing her mutter under her breath, "You need to learn how to keep your jokes to yourself." In the end, Karen didn't escalate the situation further, but I'm still not sure how I escaped from that without being completely fired. I learned 2 things that day. 1, don't ever text your boss accidentally, especially about them, and 2, never try to fix a bad situation with humor when it's not appropriate. After the incident, I made it a point to never, ever let my phone out of my sight again during work hours. And Jake? He still sends me memes about Karen, but now I've made sure that I send them to the right person. I think I've learned my lesson. Hopefully. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. So this happened about 2 weeks ago, and I'm still riding the wave of humiliation and family group chat memes. For context, I, 29M, have been dating my girlfriend Claire, 28F, for a little over a year now. Things have been going great. She's smart, hilarious, a fellow disaster in the kitchen, and she gets my weirdness, which is rare. We recently hit that meet the parents milestone, and I was determined to nail it. Claire's dad, Rick, is a gruff but good-natured guy. Former Marine, now works as a mechanic and spends most weekends tinkering around his house in the suburbs. Your classic hands-on, salt-of-the-earth kind of dude. He wasn't cold to me, exactly, but definitely gave off prove-yourself vibes. Think stoic nods and grunts over handshakes. So when he casually mentioned he was rebuilding the shed in his backyard and could use an extra set of hands, I saw my chance. I immediately volunteered. Claire looked surprised, probably because I'm about as handy as a Labrador in oven mitts, but I was determined to make a good impression. I figure it would just be a few hours of carrying wood, maybe hammering a nail or 2. How hard could it be? Spoiler, very. Saturday rolls around. I show up in my oldest jeans and my I lift things face. Rick greets me with the same deadpan nod, tosses me a pair of work gloves, and we get to it. At first, it's actually kind of fun. There's something satisfying about destroying the old, leaning shed and hauling off busted planks. Rick even cracks a smile when I manage to smash a wall with a sledgehammer and not break my foot. Then we get to rebuilding. This is where it starts to go downhill. I'm trying to follow his instructions, but the man is fast. I turn around to grab nails, and he's already 3 steps ahead, attaching joists and muttering stuff about measurements that I absolutely do not understand. Still, I keep nodding like I do. When he heads inside to grab a real drill, I didn't know there were fake ones. I decide to be helpful and keep things moving. He had been talking about sealing some joints with adhesive and mentioned using his propane torch to tighten the flashing around the base of the walls. He even showed me once, very briefly. So when I saw the torch sitting there, my brain went, "Ah, initiative." Let's impress the man. So I grab it. I remember him saying something about heating the metal just enough to mold it around the wood. I also remember him saying, don't go full blast unless you want to roast your eyebrows off, but that part came to mind after. I ignite the torch. There's a satisfying whoosh. I aim it at the metal flashing, trying to mimic what he did. Only I didn't realize that the wood below had been treated with something flammable. Very flammable. Within seconds, the bottom corner of the shed whooshes back at me, flames licking up the side like it's auditioning for a fast and furious explosion. I panic. I drop the torch. Bad move number 2. It hits the grass, which is dry because it hasn't rained in a week, and now I've got fire in 2 places. Rick comes back out right at this moment and just stares. I am stomping one fire and throwing a tarp at the other. I shout, I got this, as the tarp immediately catches fire, creating a lovely third location for the flames to spread. The man doesn't yell, doesn't even run. He walks back inside, calm as hell, and returns with a fire extinguisher. One blast and everything's covered in white foam. Silence. A bird chirps somewhere. I smell like burnt rubber and shame. He just looks at me, raises an eyebrow, and says, so, you good with power tools too? Reader, I wanted to dig a hole under the charred remains of the shed and bury myself. Claire shows up about 20 minutes later after Rick texted her to come collect her firefighter. She sees the mess and laughs. Not just a chuckle, doubled over, tears in her eyes kind of laugh. She takes a picture, sends it to her entire family. I am now the subject of several memes, including one where someone photoshopped me into a fireman calendar with a tagline, hotter than he looks. To his credit, Rick didn't seem mad. He actually seemed amused, like I was a living episode of Home Improvement. The next time I visited, he had printed out one of the memes and taped it to the fridge. But the shed was toast. Literally. Insurance covered some of the loss, but I still felt awful. I offered to pay, he refused. I offered again, and he told me I could repay him by never touching anything flammable again.
Fair.
Since then, I've been promoted from that guy Claire's dating to Firestarter. Her little brother calls me Smokey. Even Claire's grandma sent me a fire extinguisher for Easter with a card that said, for your next project.
So yeah.
I wanted to make a good impression, and instead, I nearly torched a retired Marine's backyard. On the bright side, I guess I'm unforgettable. Let me preface this by saying I am not usually a paranoid person. I'm not jumpy, I don't freak out easily, and I definitely don't call the cops over every little sound in the night. But what happened this past weekend has made me rethink a lot about myself and also chicken. So it starts on Saturday. My girlfriend went to visit her family out of town, and I had the house to myself. Normally, this would mean binge-watching old action movies, eating terribly, and lounging in boxers for 72 hours straight. But I decided, for once, to be productive. We just bought a new smoker, and I figured this was a good time to try it out. I've never smoked meat before. My only grilling experience up until this point involved an overcooked burger and one time setting off the fire alarm with a hot dog. But I watched a few YouTube videos and figured, how hard could it be? I got a whole chicken, rubbed it down with spices, and got the smoker going in the backyard around noon. Everything seemed to be going well for the first few hours. The chicken was slowly turning a golden brown, and the smell was unreal. I was in the middle of congratulating myself when I noticed the smoke. A lot of smoke. Apparently, I didn't account for wind direction, and the smoker was pointed directly at one of our basement windows, which, as luck would have it, was cracked open from the last time we aired out the house. I ran downstairs and found the whole basement hazy with smoke. I opened all the windows and set up some fans. But then it got worse. As I was airing out the basement, I heard a thud from upstairs. Then footsteps. Not mine. I froze. The smoker was in the backyard. No one should be in the house. I grabbed the nearest weapon-like object I could find, a metal broom handle, and crept upstairs. Silence. Then, from the hallway, another thud. At this point, my heart was racing. I did the only logical thing a normal person would do. I hid in the coat closet and called the cops. The operator was calm and professional while I whispered like a terrified Victorian child describing a prowler in my house. She told me to stay on the line and that a unit was nearby. 10 minutes later, blue and red lights were flashing outside. Officers came in, guns drawn. I burst out of the closet in full panic, broom in hand, yelling, "It's me." I called. They told me to stay put while they searched the house. And then I heard them laughing. Not just chuckling, laughing. Turns out, the thud was the cat knocking over a lamp in the hallway. The footsteps were my own echo off the hardwood. But that wasn't the worst part. While one officer explained this to me, another had wandered into the backyard and opened the smoker. Now, let me explain something about smoked chicken. It looks weird. The outer layer gets very dark, borderline black if you're not careful. This chicken, due to my novice technique and a little too much sugar in the rub, looked like something out of a crematorium. The officer yells, "We got something," and suddenly everyone's rushing outside. I stumble out behind them, trying to explain, but they're all standing around the smoker like it's the holy grail of forensic evidence. One officer pokes the chicken with his pen. Another radios in something about possible remains. I swear to you, it looked exactly like a charred skull at first glance. The way the meat pulled back from the bone, the empty cavity from where I'd taken out the giblets, it was like Ed Gain's dinner special. I kept trying to explain it was just a chicken. Store-bought. Rotisserie aspirations, not a murder scene. But they were already taping off the yard, and more cruisers showed up. A detective arrived. A detective. He was not amused. He asked me to describe, in detail, how I prepared the body. That was not the phrase I was hoping to hear. I walked him through the seasoning, the dry brine, the light smoke of hickory and applewood chips. I even showed him the packaging from the chicken, which I had luckily tossed in the outdoor trash bin. Eventually, he sighed and said, "It does smell good, I'll give you that." They took photos. They took notes. They even took the chicken for some reason, I guess to be tested. I had to sign a statement saying I was not, in fact, cooking a human body in my backyard. They left about 2 hours later. My neighbors, who had gathered on their porches with popcorn and folding chairs, applauded. The next morning, one of the officers returned the chicken. In a plastic evidence bag. He handed it to me with a straight face and said, "You're free to eat this, if you still want to." I did not want to. I still do not want to. My girlfriend came home Sunday night to find me sitting on the couch, glassy-eyed, the chicken evidence bag in the trash, and the smoker in pieces on the curb. I told her everything. She laughed so hard she cried. Then she picked up the broom and said, "My hero." Now, every time the cat knocks something over, she says, "Better get the cops." And the worst part? The chicken actually smelled amazing. I ruined a perfect meal, my dignity, and possibly my future reputation with law enforcement.
So yeah.
TIFU by making a chicken so suspicious looking it got treated like a corpse. So this happened last month, but the scars are still fresh, both emotionally and professionally. A little context first. I, 29M, recently started working for a medium-sized software company after almost a year of being unemployed. My last job ended in a fiery layoff situation where the entire dev team got the boot, so I was hungry for stability and desperate to make a good impression. Like, yes or no, sir, kind of eager. First week, I was borderline overdressed. Day 2, I brought muffins for the whole office. The hunger was real. Now, I love music when I code. I focus better, I get into a flow state, and the world disappears. But I also know there's a fine line between chill and antisocial, so I was trying to strike that balance. My new manager, let's call him Greg, seemed pretty laid back. Think flannel shirts and dad jokes. My team? Mostly a mix of Gen Zers who speak in memes and 2 quiet guys in their 40s who communicate via Jira tickets. Day 4, I decide to bring in my new noise-canceling over-ear headphones. I just got them for my birthday, top of the line, expensive, and honestly, they're so good they could drown out an air raid siren. I figured I'd just put them on during heads-down coding blocks and take them off for meetings or casual team stuff.
Simple, right?
Well, things started great. I got into the zone, cranking out code like a caffeinated octopus. Every so often, I'd notice someone walking past my desk or waving, and I'd smile and nod, totally oblivious to what they were saying or why they were gesturing. I assumed they were just being friendly. Then, right before lunch, I vaguely registered some motion in my periphery. Greg was standing next to me, mouth moving, obviously trying to talk to me. I jumped and yanked the headphones off. He laughed and said something about getting lost in the Matrix, and I apologized profusely. He seemed chill, so I didn't think much of it. Now here's where it all goes sideways. After lunch, we had an impromptu fire drill. Apparently this company does a surprise drill every few months to keep everyone on their toes. Well, I missed the entire thing. The alarm went off, this weird honking noise that's completely unlike your typical fire alarm, and I didn't hear a damn thing. I was deep into debugging a particularly nasty chunk of legacy code and jamming out to some Viking metal. Yes, you read that right. According to witnesses, people around me started standing up, looking confused, then heading to the exits. Someone apparently tapped me on the shoulder. Nothing. Another person waved their arms directly in front of my face. No response. I was in Valhalla. Eventually, Greg had to come back into the building after doing the head count and realizing I was missing. He found me still at my desk, bobbing my head like a lunatic. The look on his face when I finally noticed him was something between horror and disbelief. I yanked the headphones off, confused, and before I could say anything, he just said, "There's a fire drill. You didn't evacuate." Cue full-body panic. I tried to explain. He raised a hand and told me to just come outside. Outside, it was like walking into my own public shaming. Everyone was standing around the parking lot, and the moment I walked out with Greg, people clapped. I don't mean the supportive, "Yeah, you survived" kind of clap. I mean the sarcastic, mocking slow clap. One guy actually yelled, "Hey, the building's not on fire anymore. You can go back to debugging." I wanted to melt into the asphalt. Greg gave a quick talk to the group, throwing in a reminder about headphone volume and safety protocols, but didn't name me directly.
Didn't have to. I was that guy now.
I spent the rest of the day quietly avoiding eye contact and contemplating early retirement. But wait, there's more. The next morning, I walk in and someone has left a gift bag on my desk. Inside, a pair of neon orange construction earmuffs with a note that read, "Asterisk for when you really, really need to zone out. Safety first. Asterisk." I wanted to die. Later that day, HR called me in. Not to reprimand me, thankfully, but to tell me they'd be updating the fire drill procedures to include visibly checking all workstations, which, while sensible, also meant they were literally changing policy because of me. They even asked if I'd be okay with being part of the training video they're planning to make next quarter. I declined.
Politely.
It's been a few weeks since then, and things have calmed down, but the nickname stuck. Around the office, I'm now known as Fireproof. One guy changed my Slack display name to it, and it somehow stuck across all my tools. Even Greg uses it now in meetings. Moral of the story? Noise-canceling headphones are great, until they isolate you so completely that you miss an entire building evacuation and become the subject of future workplace safety training materials. So this all started about 6 months ago, when I moved in with my girlfriend, Rachel. Everything was going great. We split chores, we cooked together, and it felt like one of those too-good-to-be-true relationships. Except for one thing. Her cat, Eugene. Eugene is a giant orange Maine Coon who, according to Rachel, has been through more than most people. She adopted him after her ex dumped her and left her in a rough spot. Eugene was her emotional rock, her therapist, and apparently, her favorite man before me. The dude had his own Instagram, got Christmas presents from her parents, and even had a seat at the dinner table. Not metaphorically, I mean he sat at the table on a little cushion. The problem was, Eugene hated me. From day one, the cat hissed, growled, and once even pissed in my laundry basket. Rachel was mortified, but also very defensive. "He's just territorial," she said. "You have to earn his trust." So, being the stupidly competitive idiot I am, I decided I'd win Eugene over. But not by the usual treats or playtime. No, I went full method acting. I became Eugene. It started with harmless stuff. When Rachel wasn't home, I'd mimic Eugene's meow just to mess with him. Then I started watching him, like, really watching him. How he walked.
How he yawned.
How he knocked things off the counter just to assert dominance. I practiced copying his gait around the apartment. I even found myself sitting on the back of the couch in the exact way he did, just to see if I could feel what it was like to be the cat. Then came the night Rachel was on a Zoom call with her friends, and she jokingly said, "Sometimes I think Eugene's smarter than half the people I know." I was in the other room, heard that, and without thinking, meowed from the hallway. She paused. "Did you hear that? That was so weird. That sounded like Eugene, but he's right here." She laughed. I laughed. Eugene did not. But that gave me an idea. The next time Rachel left for work, I started talking to Eugene. Not in the usual "who's a good boy" tone, but like we were equals. I'd meow, then respond to myself in cat voice. Sometimes I'd even crawl around the apartment on all fours. This went on for weeks. I'd meow at 2 a.m., knock cups off tables when I wanted attention, and stare at Rachel from the hallway when she was on the toilet, just like Eugene. I committed. And weirdly, Eugene started warming up to me. He'd sleep at the foot of the bed instead of across the apartment. He'd let me pet him. One night, he even climbed onto my chest and purred like a motorboat. I was so proud I almost cried. Rachel noticed, too. "Wow, he really likes you now. What changed?" I just smiled and said, "I guess I'm just a cat guy." But then the line blurred. There was one evening when I was curled up in the papasan chair, wrapped in a blanket, and Rachel walked in, looked at me and said, "You and Eugene are like twins." I didn't respond. I just blinked slowly at her. She laughed, took a picture, and walked away. But I stayed there. For hours. I stopped hanging out with my friends. When they asked to play Warzone, I said I was busy. In reality, I was crouched under the bed, watching shadows on the wall and chasing dust bunnies. I stopped shaving. I slept during the day and roamed the apartment at night. I even developed a weird craving for tuna. At this point, I should have stopped. But I was too deep. I was living a double life. Man by day, cat by also day.
And night.
Things took a sharp turn 2 weeks ago when Rachel brought home a friend from work. We'll call her Jess. She was allergic to cats but came over anyway because she wanted to meet me. We're sitting in the living room, Rachel and Jess chatting on the couch. Eugene is sitting across the room, eyeing Jess like a predator. I'm on the floor next to the couch, crouched on all fours, because I thought it'd be funny to act like Eugene for a second. Jess turns to me and laughs. "You really are like him." And I, without thinking, crawled under the coffee table, looked her dead in the eyes, and let out the most guttural, throaty meow I've ever produced. Silence. Jess stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Rachel blinked, smiled awkwardly, and said, "He does that sometimes." Jess left 15 minutes later and never came back. I don't blame her. Rachel confronted me that night. "Okay, I need to ask, are you okay?" I shrugged.
"Yeah, why?" She paused.
"You were licking your hand and wiping your face during dinner." I had no memory of that. But when she showed me the video, sure enough, I was licking the back of my hand and rubbing it over my ear while she was talking about her mom's birthday party. She sat me down and gently asked if I wanted to talk to someone. A therapist, maybe. That's when I realized I had become Eugene. Not in the cute, "my girlfriend's cat finally likes me" way.
No.
I had mentally merged with a cat. I stopped cold turkey. Deleted all the cat videos I'd bookmarked. Unfollowed the cats of TikTok accounts. Took a long, hot shower. Sat on an actual chair like a normal person. Rachel has been patient. She laughs about it now. Sometimes she calls me Whiskers when she's feeling cheeky. Eugene seems disappointed in me, like I abandoned some sacred feline brotherhood. But the worst part? Sometimes, when Rachel's asleep, I still find myself crouching on the windowsill at 3 a.m., watching the streetlights and wondering if I could make the jump to the next building. Not because I want to, but because Eugene could. TIFU by accidentally ruining my girlfriend's surprise birthday party and almost breaking up over it. So, this happened last weekend, and I'm still reeling from the aftermath. I can't believe how badly I messed up, and to make matters worse, it's one of those things I should have easily avoided if I'd just listened. But, hindsight is 2020, right? To set the stage, my girlfriend, Sarah, and I have been together for almost 2 years now. She's honestly one of the most thoughtful people I know, and she always makes sure to do something extra special for my birthdays. I love her to bits, and when her birthday came up, I wanted to return the favor and do something even better for her. I know her well enough to know she doesn't want anything overly extravagant. No big parties, no grand gestures, just a low-key, intimate celebration with people she actually cares about. She's a bit introverted, so big social events aren't her thing. She loves having a few close friends over, and she's into all things quirky. Think vintage movie marathons, homemade pizza, and a casual vibe where people can just hang out and have fun. Now, the big issue was that I was supposed to keep her birthday party a secret from her. Yeah, that was the plan. I had been coordinating with a couple of her friends for a week, planning the surprise. We were going to get her friends to show up early, decorate the apartment, and have everything ready when Sarah came home from work. Simple, right?
Wrong.
Here's where I went wrong. I didn't actually confirm the details properly with her friends. A couple of days before the party, I texted Sarah to confirm what time she'd be home on her birthday. She replied, probably around 6 p.m. I'm going to be running a few errands, but I should be home by 6:30. That was my first mistake, forgetting that this could give me a tiny window of opportunity to mess things up. I'd already arranged everything. The decorations were already set up, the pizza dough was rising, and the cake was ready for delivery. Everything was going according to plan. So, all I had to do was make sure she stayed out of the house long enough for the party to be set up. This is where I started to overthink. I know Sarah like the back of my hand, and I knew there was a chance she might be running late or decide to come home early, so I made sure her friends would text me when they were ready for her to come home. The plan was for me to tell her that we needed to go pick something up, just a little diversion, and then bring her home to a surprise. But here's where it all went downhill. I miscommunicated with Sarah's best friend, Emma, about the timing. I had thought that Emma was the one coordinating when everyone should arrive and when to start decorating, but turns out I was the one who was supposed to do that. Emma just assumed I had everything under control, and I assumed she was on top of it. So when I got the text from Emma saying that they were all ready and that we could bring Sarah home anytime, I started to panic. It was only 5:45 and I still had about 45 minutes to kill. Sarah was on her way home. I needed to stall her somehow. I tried everything. I started suggesting random detours, like maybe picking up some candles or grabbing a coffee, anything to delay her. But she wasn't buying it. She was already irritated because she'd had a long day, and I was acting way too weird. "Why are you acting so strange?" she asked me. That was mistake number 2. I panicked and went full-on awkward. My stalling started to sound more like I was hiding something, and that made her suspicious. She asked, "Are you planning something? Is this some surprise thing? Are we having people over?" And that's when I made my final mistake. I said, No, it's nothing. I just thought we could, get some ice cream or something, just the two of us." She raised an eyebrow at me, clearly not buying it, but I pushed on. Finally, she stopped asking questions and, with a sigh, said, "Fine, let's just get home." I had no choice but to drive her back to the apartment. I was sweating bullets at this point, and the entire car ride felt like a ticking clock. I had to get her out of the car, get her inside, and somehow stall her long enough to let everyone hide. The worst part? The moment we walked in, I realized I'd totally forgotten to ask one simple question. What if she wasn't in the mood for a party? What if she just wanted to relax? And here I was, dragging her into something she didn't ask for. When I opened the door to our apartment, Sarah froze. The lights were dim, and there was a banner hanging across the living room with a huge happy birthday sign. And before I could even say anything, she looked at me with a mix of shock and confusion. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. She looked around and saw her friends jumping out from behind the couch and yelling, "Surprise!" She stood there, completely frozen. I wasn't sure what to do. I was waiting for her to laugh, or at least smile. But instead, she took a step back and looked at me. I can't believe you did this. I immediately felt the weight of the situation sink in. I tried to salvage it by saying, I thought you'd like it. It's your favorite people, your favorite food, everything's here, just like you wanted. She didn't respond right away, and that made me panic even more. I turned to Emma, who was standing awkwardly by the door, and tried to give her a signal that this was going horribly. But Sarah just stood there, processing it all. After a minute, she sighed and said, I appreciate the thought, but I told you I didn't want a big deal. You really didn't listen, did you? I could feel my heart sinking as she continued. You didn't even ask me if I was okay with this. You just assumed that I'd want a surprise party. You've been acting weird all day. I just wanted to chill, you know? At that moment, I realized just how much I had messed up. I thought I was doing the right thing by planning a surprise, but in reality, I had ignored what she actually wanted. I spent the next few minutes apologizing, but I could tell the mood had been ruined. I couldn't believe I had failed to listen to her and had turned her special day into an awkward mess. The rest of the night was rough. She eventually warmed up a little bit, but it was clear she wasn't enjoying herself as much as she could have. We did end up eating pizza, watching a movie, and having cake, but the spark of excitement was gone. After her friends left, Sarah and I had a long conversation about expectations, communication, and the importance of listening to each other. She told me that while she appreciated the effort, the surprise was just not what she had in mind. We spent the next few days talking through things, and I promised I'd never make that mistake again. It was a tough lesson learned, but one that has brought us closer as a couple. I guess sometimes we try so hard to make something perfect that we forget to consider what the other person actually wants. I learned a hard lesson that night. The best way to surprise someone is by listening to them, not assuming you know what they want. I'll never make that mistake again. Ever. TIFU by trying to fix a broken faucet and flooding my entire apartment building. So, this happened last week, and I'm still not sure if I'm ever going to live it down. I'm one of those people who likes to think I'm pretty handy around the house. I know how to change a light bulb, fix a leaky faucet, unclog a drain, and I've even learned how to do some basic plumbing stuff thanks to YouTube. So, when I noticed that the faucet in my kitchen sink was dripping incessantly, I figured, hey, this is a problem I can solve myself. I went to the hardware store and bought a few tools, some wrenches, a new washer, and some plumber's tape, all while trying to ignore the slightly intimidating look of the guys working in the plumbing aisle. I figured this would be a 20-minute fix, and I get back to my weekend of relaxation. I get home and immediately start turning off the water supply to the sink. My apartment has one of those weird old shut-off valves under the sink that only seem to work half the time, but after a bit of struggling, I managed to get it turned off. I put down a towel just in case of any leaks and unscrewed the faucet handles, feeling pretty proud of myself. The only thing that gave me pause was that the pipe leading to the faucet seemed to have a weird twist in it, but I brushed it off. I'm not an expert after all, but how hard could it be to just replace a washer? I went ahead and replaced the old washer and put everything back together. There was a moment where I wondered if I had tightened the faucet handles back on too much, but I thought to myself, it's better to over-tighten than under-tighten, right? I flipped the water supply back on, gave the faucet a test run, and nothing seemed to leak.
Great.
I had done it, but then something happened. As I stood there admiring my work, I noticed a faint sound of running water that wasn't coming from the sink. I turned around, and to my horror, I saw a stream of water gushing out from underneath the cabinet where the pipes were. At first, it was just a trickle, but then the water started spraying more violently. I panicked and tried to twist the faucet handles back to the off position, but they were already as tight as they could go. In my panic, I immediately thought, I need to shut off the water supply, but that's when I realized the valve under the sink wasn't working. No matter how hard I twisted, it wouldn't budge. The water continued to gush, and I could feel the situation slipping further out of control. The towel I had placed on the floor was already soaked through, and water was now beginning to spill out onto the kitchen floor. I sprinted to the main water shutoff valve for the entire apartment, which was in a utility closet in the hallway. My heart was pounding. I didn't know how much damage had already been done, but I knew that if I didn't act fast, it was only going to get worse. I flung open the closet door, only to discover that the main shutoff valve was incredibly old and completely rusted. It barely moved. I was starting to panic now. I felt like I was in one of those nightmare scenarios where everything is happening too quickly and nothing is going right. Water was starting to pool on the kitchen floor, and now it was beginning to creep under the door and into the hallway. In my desperation, I ran back to the kitchen and grabbed a bucket from under the sink. I shoved it under the faucet to try and catch as much of the water as possible, but it was no use. The water was spilling everywhere now. I realized I needed help, but I wasn't sure who to call. I tried my landlord, but he didn't answer. I called a plumber, but he couldn't make it for at least an hour. As I stood there, drenched in sweat and partially soaked by the water that was now flooding my kitchen, I heard a noise coming from the hallway. I opened the door to find my neighbor, who had heard the commotion and came over to check what was going on. She took one look at the water pouring out of my apartment and immediately yelled, "The entire building's water supply is off now. What did you do?" At that point, I felt like I was going to pass out from the stress. I tried to explain that I was just fixing a faucet, but it sounded ridiculous even to my own ears. She ran downstairs to tell the building manager, who came up with another neighbor to try and help. When the manager arrived, he immediately told me that I needed to turn off the main water supply for the entire building because, apparently, the water was being pushed all the way up through the pipes and causing issues in the other apartments. That's when I found out that my building is connected to the water supply of the entire block, and by messing with the plumbing in my own apartment, I had effectively turned the water supply on for the entire building, causing the pipes to back up and flood several of the other units. I was mortified. The building manager and a few neighbors spent the next few hours frantically trying to turn everything off and prevent further damage. They ended up having to call in a professional plumber who could work on the main shutoff valve. By the time they got everything under control, I was completely embarrassed and exhausted. The next day, my landlord called me and said that I'd be responsible for covering the damage done to the other apartments due to the flood. I could hardly believe it. Apparently, some of the units on the lower floors had significant water damage, and my insurance didn't cover the extent of the damage to the building structure. To add insult to injury, the plumber who fixed the mess told me that if I'd just called him in the first place, I wouldn't have had to go through all of this. He also told me that, for future reference, I should never, ever mess with anything that involves the main water supply unless I really knew what I was doing. So yeah, I now have a massive repair bill on my hands, a permanent mark on my reputation with my neighbors, and I'll probably never be trusted with any kind of DIY project again. All because I tried to save a few bucks and fix a leaky faucet. TLDR, tried to fix a leaky faucet myself. Ended up flooding my entire apartment building because I couldn't turn off the water supply and messed with the plumbing. Now I'm responsible for thousands of dollars in damage. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with my cooking skills and nearly burning down her apartment. So, a little backstory. I, 24M, had been crushing on this girl, 24F, for months. We met at a mutual friend's party, hit it off, and exchanged numbers. After a few weeks of casual texting and a few dates, I figured it was time to really show her that I was someone worth keeping around. I had this idea to cook her a homemade dinner because, well, everyone loves a guy who can cook, right? At least, that's what I told myself. Now, I'm not terrible in the kitchen, but I'm definitely no Gordon Ramsay. My culinary skills are more instant ramen than beef Wellington. But I figured, how hard could it be to make a nice, impressive meal? I decided on making a gourmet meal. Steak, mashed potatoes, and sautéed vegetables. Simple enough, right? I watched a few YouTube tutorials, took notes, and felt confident enough to go ahead with my plan. Little did I know, I was about to create a disaster that would make me question my life choices. First, I went to the store. I spent an absurd amount of time picking out the perfect cuts of steak, making sure they were fresh and well-marbled. I also grabbed some fancy-looking potatoes and a bag of pre-chopped veggies. I wanted everything to look impressive and taste even better. I also got some expensive wine because I heard pairing wine with steak was a must. I wasn't sure if it was actually necessary, but it seemed like the kind of thing you do when you want to look sophisticated. I got back to my apartment and started prepping. I had set the date for 7 p.m., and it was 4 p.m. by the time I started, so I had plenty of time to get everything ready. But in hindsight, I should have realized I was already cutting it too close. Cooking a meal like this in 3 hours? Yeah, that's a rookie mistake. Anyway, I started with the mashed potatoes. I peeled and boiled them, not really paying attention to how long they were taking to cook. At some point, I realized I should have probably added salt to the water. Too late for that. But no big deal. I figured I could just season them later, right? Then it was time for the steak. I seasoned the steaks with salt, pepper, and some garlic powder. I had watched a video where the chef said you have to sear the steaks in a super hot pan for a few minutes on each side, so I cranked up the burner to max heat. I put a bit of oil in the pan, tossed in the steaks, and immediately heard that sizzle. But here's where I made my first mistake. I didn't actually have a good non-stick pan. I had one of those cheap, old pans that always makes everything stick. I panicked for a second when I saw some of the steaks starting to burn, but I kept going because I didn't want to screw it up too early. As I tried to flip the steaks, some of them got stuck to the pan, and I ended up with these charred bits stuck to the bottom. I turned the heat down, but at that point, the damage was already done. I tried to salvage them by adding butter, but it just made everything worse. The steaks looked like they had been through a war zone, and I started to feel the weight of my poor decisions. But there was no turning back now. The steaks had to be served, even if they looked like they were from a medieval feast. In the middle of all this chaos, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her, confirming she would be over at 7 p.m. sharp.
Great.
I needed to get everything under control. I had about an hour left to pull this off. As I tried to salvage the steaks by putting them in the oven to finish cooking, I turned my attention back to the mashed potatoes. They were supposed to be creamy and fluffy, but instead, they had turned into a sticky, glue-like mess. I realized I had forgotten to drain them properly before mashing, so now they were just a big pot of starchy goo. At this point, I was about to give up, but I had already committed to the meal, and I wasn't about to let her think I was some amateur. I tried adding milk and butter to the potatoes in the hopes that I could rescue them, but all it did was make them look like lumpy porridge. Then the vegetables. They were the one thing that seemed like it could go right, but as I sautéed them in a pan, I made the cardinal sin of leaving them unattended for too long. I turned around to check on the steaks and noticed the vegetables starting to burn. I tried to salvage them by turning the heat down and stirring them, but they were already too far gone. The smell of burnt vegetables filled the kitchen, and I could feel the heat of my impending disaster. As I frantically tried to pull everything together, the worst thing that could possibly happen happened. The smoke alarm went off. At first, I thought it was just a brief glitch, but no. The alarm blared louder, and the entire apartment filled with smoke. I opened the windows and started waving a towel around to get rid of the smoke, but it was too much. The fire department could have been on their way at this point. I quickly grabbed the steaks from the oven, realizing they were only slightly less ruined than the burnt veggies. I threw everything on the table, hoping that maybe if I put it all together, the disaster would look like it had been intentional. I sent her a quick text to let her know I was almost ready, but at this point, I was sweating bullets. There was no way this meal was going to be edible. At 6:50 p.m., she texted me to say she was outside. I threw everything into some semblance of order on the table, grabbed the wine, which I hadn't even opened yet, and rushed to the door. As soon as I opened it, I was met with her beautiful smile, and I immediately felt like the biggest idiot on the planet. We sat down to eat, and I watched her face as she cautiously took her first bite. She chewed slowly, probably trying to figure out how to be polite. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for her to speak. She smiled, but it was one of those forced smiles. She took another bite, and then another, her eyes widening slightly. "So, what do you think?" I asked, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "It's interesting," she said, her voice wavering. "What's in the mashed potatoes?" I didn't want to admit that they were basically glue, so I just said, "Oh, a little bit of my secret ingredient." She nodded, taking another bite. I watched as she forced herself to swallow. After a painfully long silence, she said, "Well, at least the wine is nice." And that's when I knew it was over. By the end of the night, I could tell she wasn't exactly thrilled about the dinner, but she was too polite to say anything. When she left, she gave me a hug and told me she had a good time, but I knew she was just being kind. I never heard from her again. So, yeah, TIFU by trying to impress my crush with my cooking skills, and instead, I almost burned down her apartment and served her a meal that could only be described as a culinary war crime. Never again. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by accidentally setting off the fire alarms at my building in the middle of the night and causing chaos for everyone in the process. It all started when I moved into this new apartment building about 6 months ago. It's a nice building, not too big, but with a good set of amenities. I had been living alone for a while, and honestly, I was just glad to find a place I could afford in a decent neighborhood. The thing about my building, though, was that it was old, and you could hear everything through the walls. The sound of footsteps, doors opening and closing, and especially the fire alarms. Those were like the soundtrack of my life, since they seemed to go off at least once a month for no real reason. Now, I'm not exactly the type to freak out over little things, but I'm also not one to ignore safety warnings. So, when I was told about the fire alarm system during the move-in orientation, I paid close attention. The alarms were connected to a central system that notified the fire department automatically if they were triggered, and they would ring throughout the building, even in the middle of the night. This fact alone was a little unsettling, but I figured it was just part of living in an older building. One Tuesday night, around 2 a.m., I found myself wide awake. I had been on a late-night binge of watching some documentary series, and I was too wired to sleep. I decided to get up and grab a snack from the kitchen. Nothing too exciting, just some leftover pizza. The kitchen is a bit of a maze, with lots of drawers and cabinets that all look the same, so I ended up rummaging around a bit before finding my food. When I got back to the couch, I realized I had spilled some crumbs on the carpet. At this point, I thought I might as well vacuum them up because, why not, right? So, I went over to the closet where I kept the vacuum, and while I was in there, I noticed the fire extinguisher hanging on the wall. It had been bothering me since the first day I moved in. The thing was ancient, and I honestly wasn't sure if it would even work if there was a real fire. It was one of those old red ones that probably hadn't been checked in years. Anyway, for some strange reason, I thought, hey, I should probably check this out just to be safe. I grabbed it off the wall and tried to read the instructions, but they were pretty faded. But I figured, what's the worst that could happen? I just give it a quick inspection to make sure it's not expired or anything. Now, at this point, I should probably mention that I was in a kind of half-asleep, almost delirious state. The kind of tired where your brain doesn't fully function, but you still have just enough energy to make poor decisions. And that's where everything started going wrong. As I was holding the fire extinguisher, I noticed a small black lever on the top, just beneath the nozzle. I don't know what came over me, but I thought, what does this do? I tried pushing the lever, and that's when it happened. Something hissed, and I immediately realized I had just activated the fire extinguisher. But before I could even process what was happening, a burst of powder shot out, and it completely filled the air around me. I panicked. I tried to quickly twist the extinguisher back into its original position, but nothing worked. The powder kept spewing out. My apartment was covered in this fine, white dust that settled everywhere. The couch, the floor, the ceiling. Hell, even the pizza I had been eating was now covered in it. At that moment, I didn't know what to do. My first thought was to run to the window and open it, hoping to air out the place, but all I could see was the same pitch-black sky of a typical night. Then it hit me. Oh my God, I might have triggered the fire alarm. I rushed out of the room, grabbing the vacuum cleaner in an attempt to clean up the mess, but before I even reached the living room, the unmistakable sound of the fire alarm blared through the entire building. You know the sound, loud, screeching, and impossible to ignore. It was as if the building itself was screaming at me for my stupidity. Panic surged through me. The fire alarms in this building weren't just loud. They were connected directly to the fire department. They would call the fire trucks automatically if the alarm was triggered. I could already imagine the firefighters rushing over to my building, fully suited up, all because of my idiotic curiosity. So, in the middle of the night, I'm standing there, completely covered in fire extinguisher powder, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't just ignore it. I grabbed my phone and quickly dialed the building's emergency line, praying that someone would answer. After what felt like an eternity, a sleep-deprived, groggy-sounding voice picked up. It was the building manager. "Hello," he said, clearly not prepared for the chaos at 2 a.m.
Hi.
It's me from apartment 2B. I accidentally triggered the fire alarm. I think I messed up the fire extinguisher. It was an accident. There was a long pause on the other end. Then he responded, "Oh no. Okay, I'm sending someone right now." Just as I hung up, I heard sirens approaching in the distance. The fire trucks were on their way. My stomach dropped. The last thing I wanted was for the entire neighborhood to be woken up in the middle of the night because I had tried to check if my fire extinguisher was still working. Within minutes, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens outside. They were here. A moment later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find two firefighters, fully dressed in their gear, standing there looking at me like I had just ruined their night. They walked in, checked the situation, and I had to explain everything: how I'd accidentally triggered the fire extinguisher, how I was trying to clean up the mess, and how the fire alarms had gone off because of my stupidity. They were surprisingly chill about it, but one of them couldn't help but laugh a little. "You know, the fire extinguisher is supposed to be used on actual fires, right?" "Yeah," I said, sheepishly. I figured that out the hard way. After a few minutes, the fire department gave me the all-clear, and the building manager apologized for the inconvenience. They even offered to help clean up some of the mess, but at that point, I was too embarrassed to let them. As they left, one of the firefighters patted me on the shoulder and said, "Next time, just call us first. No need to test out the extinguisher in your apartment." So, in the end, I had a perfectly good reason to stay up for the next few hours and finish vacuuming up the powder. I also learned a valuable lesson. Don't mess with things you don't understand, especially in the middle of the night. The next time I need to check if something is still working, I'll leave it to the professionals. The whole thing cost me a solid night's sleep, a hefty cleaning bill, and probably some street cred with my neighbors. But hey, at least now I can say I've had a fire drill in my own home. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend's dad with my outdoor skills and almost burning down half a state park. So, this happened about a month ago, and I'm still getting roasted for it, pun intended, every time I go near a grill, lighter, or even say the word camping. For context, my girlfriend, let's call her Emily, and I have been dating for about a year. Things are great, like stupidly great. The only obstacle is her dad, who's basically a real-life Ron Swanson. Big, burly dude with a lumberjack beard, ex-military, lives off-grid 2 weeks out of every month kind of guy. He carves his own furniture. His handshake feels like a hydraulic press. Now, I'm more of a, let's say, indoor cat. I work in tech. I collect retro video games. The closest I get to roughing it is when Starbucks runs out of oat milk. But I really wanted this guy to like me. Emily told me her family was doing a weekend camping trip in a big state park and that her dad invited me to come. "He said he wants to get to know you," she said with a smile that, in hindsight, masked the chaos I was walking into. Day 1 starts off okay. I managed to put up my tent with only minor humiliation. Her 10-year-old niece finished before I did. Emily's dad, let's call him Mike, sizes me up with that silent stare that feels like it's peeling your skin off, but he doesn't say anything too aggressive. We go on a hike, I lag behind, pretend I'm just appreciating the scenery. That night, he lights a fire with flint and steel like some wizard while I watch, trying not to look impressed. And then it begins. Mike says something like, "Tomorrow we're splitting up to do our own meals. Let's see what you've got." Emily raises her eyebrows at me. This is clearly a challenge. Now here's the thing, I have grilled before. Like apartment balcony burgers. I once used a cast iron skillet. I figured I could handle camp cooking easy. I spent the night mentally planning the most alpha meal I could think of. Steak. On an open fire. With roasted potatoes and foil. Man food. The next morning, I wake up early to get everything ready. Everyone else is doing their thing, cooking oatmeal, heating up breakfast burritos, whatever. I've got my little site picked out with the fire ring. I pour in charcoal, and would like I saw Mike do the night before, and I pull out my secret weapon, lighter fluid. A lot of it. Because if some is good, more is better, right?
Wrong.
I douse the whole setup. Like douse it. The moment I light it, there's this whoosh that sucks the air out of my lungs. A fireball erupts and I jump back, singeing my eyebrows in the process. Everyone within 50 feet hears the noise. A couple kids scream. Mike looks over from across the campground, chewing jerky, and starts speed-walking toward me with the exact expression a firefighter might wear if he saw someone trying to deep-fry a turkey in a woodshop. It gets worse. Turns out, the embers from my overzealous fire pit, combined with the light breeze that day, shot out little sparks that floated over to the dry brush outside the fire ring. Within minutes, a small grass fire starts crawling across the edge of the campsite. Panic sets in. Emily's mom grabs a cooler and starts dumping water. Her little cousin starts crying. Mike yells something like, "Contain it," while I, in my infinite wisdom, decide to grab my unopened bag of charcoal and try to smother the flames with it. All I end up doing is feeding the fire like an idiot. Eventually, the park rangers show up. Someone had already called them. Thank God. They bring in a little ATV with a water tank and hoses and put everything out before it spreads to the trees, but not before about 400 square feet of dry grass has turned to ash. They're not amused. They ask me if I started the fire, and I say yes because obviously I did. They take my information, write up a report, and kindly inform me that I'll be receiving a citation and possibly a fine, depending on how the investigation goes. They don't arrest me, but I've never felt more like a criminal in my life. Mike doesn't say a word for the rest of the day. That night, the group silently eats campfire chili that Emily's aunt made, and I sit in my camp chair with no eyebrows, smelling faintly of smoke and shame. At one point, Mike walks over, sits down next to me, hands me a beer, and says, "Next time less fluid, more brain." I nod. That was probably the nicest thing he could have said, honestly. We left the next day, and Emily tried to reassure me by saying that nobody died, and the ranger said it wasn't technically arson, which is not as comforting as she thought it would be. So now, I'm the guy who almost torched a state park trying to prove he could cook steak over a fire. Emily's family now refers to that weekend as the Great Burn, and Mike has officially gifted me a fire extinguisher for Christmas, complete with my name engraved on it. Every time someone brings up the outdoors, the story comes out. Every single
Time.
Moral of the story? If you're trying to impress your girlfriend's dad, maybe don't reenact a scene from Backdraft. Also, bring marshmallows. At least then, when you start a fire, you've got snacks. TIFU by accidentally becoming the star of a neighborhood crime ring in my pajamas. So this happened a few weeks ago, but I'm still getting weird looks from my neighbors, and it's only now becoming funny enough for me to talk about without dying inside. For context, I live in a pretty chill suburban neighborhood, the kind with lemonade stands in summer and passive-aggressive Facebook groups about trash cans left out too long. I'm a 33-year-old dude who works from home in tech, which mostly means I live in various levels of pajamas and forget how to interact with people on a regular basis. It all started because my neighbor, let's call her Linda, asked me to house sit and watch her dog, Pickles, for 3 days while she visited her daughter. I agreed. Partly because Pickles is an adorable little gremlin, and partly because I figured it'd be nice to have a change of scenery and raid someone else's snacks guilt-free. Linda gave me her keys, a printed list of Pickles-related duties, and a note that said, "Just be careful with the alarm, it's a little weird." That should have been my first red flag. Day 1 went fine. Pickles and I bonded over some leftover rotisserie chicken and reruns of Frasier. Day 2 is where everything began to unravel. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was in full slob mode. Old pizza-stained sweatpants, a t-shirt with a mysterious hole near the armpit, and bedhead that could legally be considered a bird's nest. I was just heading over to Linda's to let Pickles out one last time before bed. I walked over, key in hand, yawning, phone in pocket. I opened the door, walked in, and the second it clicked shut behind me, the alarm system started shrieking like a banshee, with a megaphone. Now, this wasn't just any alarm. This was the kind of alarm you hear in movies right before someone rappels from the ceiling in a ski mask. I panicked and started punching in the code Linda gave me. Nothing. More beeping. Louder sirens. A voice starts blaring over the speaker system saying, Intruder alert. Authorities have been notified. Pickles, of course, chose this moment to take the world's most terrifying poop in the middle of the hallway while barking his tiny lungs out. I called Linda. No answer. I tried the code again. Nothing. I don't know why, but my next brilliant idea was to leave the house, thinking maybe it would reset or something. Spoiler. It did not. Instead, two things happened almost simultaneously. The cops showed up and I locked myself out. Picture this. A grown man in shredded pajamas, barefoot, holding a terrified chihuahua, standing on a porch while 3 police cars roll up with lights flashing. One officer gets out, hand on holster, and yells, "Step away from the house." I try to explain, but I'm yelling over the alarm and the sound of Pickles losing his mind. I swear I'm the dog sitter. Her name is Linda. The code is 1432 or 1342, or maybe, do you guys like dogs? At this point, Linda's other neighbor, Carol, comes out in her robe with her phone out like she's filming an episode of Cops. I hear her say, "That's the guy. He doesn't even live there. I think he was casing the place yesterday." Turns out, Carol had seen me earlier that day wandering around Linda's yard, trying to figure out how the hose worked. That, combined with my semi-feral appearance, convinced her I was a burglar who liked to snoop before making his move. The officers make me put the dog down and walk toward them with my hands up. One of them is clearly trying not to laugh while another one is asking me questions like, "So, what exactly is your relationship to Pickles?" Eventually, Linda calls back. Her voice is groggy, and she's clearly been asleep, but when she hears what's happening, I can hear her go from sleepy to horrified in 0.3 seconds. She confirms my identity, gives the correct alarm code, which was 1 digit off from what she wrote down, and the police finally stand down. You'd think it ends there, but no. Apparently, because of Carol's call and the way I was suspiciously circling the yard, I got flagged on the local neighborhood app as a potential porch pirate, which is what they call people who steal Amazon packages. Someone posted a blurry ring cam photo of me holding Pickles like a baby, with the caption, "Seen lurking. Possibly armed. Be vigilant." So now I'm locally infamous. The next morning, I walked to the coffee shop 2 blocks away. The barista took one look at me and said, "Oh, hey, you're the guy who broke into Linda's house." People have started waving at me differently, like, cautiously. The mailman avoids eye contact. Carol hasn't apologized, but she did offer me banana bread the next week, which might have been a peace offering or poisoned. I haven't decided. And Pickles? Pickles now barks every time he sees me like I'm the personification of the apocalypse. I'm 90% sure he posted the ring cam footage himself.
So yeah.
To full by accidentally convincing my entire neighborhood I was a criminal mastermind in sleepwear, and now I'm the suburban legend known as the Pajama Bandit. So, this happened about 2 weeks ago, and I'm still cringing into the next dimension every time I think about it. I, 26M, moved to a new city a couple of months ago for a job and didn't know anyone here. I decided to try and make friends the only way I know how: nerd out. After scrolling through local groups on Facebook, I found a Dungeons & Dragons group that had been looking for a new player after one of theirs moved away. I messaged the DM, Dungeon Master, a guy named Greg, mid-30s, who told me they were 4 years into a long-running homebrew campaign, and while they were hesitant about adding someone this late in the game, they liked my enthusiasm and invited me over for a session to see how I fit in. I've been playing D&D since college. I'm no Matt Mercer, but I know my way around character sheets and dice. I was told to make a level 14 character to match the party. The group was serious about their story and roleplay, so I spent an entire weekend crafting Thorn Duskwalker, a half-elf warlock with a tragic backstory, morally ambiguous motivations, and exactly the kind of flair I thought would impress a veteran group. I even wrote a dramatic monologue. God help me. I show up on game night. There are 6 other people, all clearly very close, and they were super welcoming. Snacks on the table, drinks, laminated maps, hand-painted minis. These people were not playing around. Greg had a binder thick enough to stop a bullet labeled "The World of Ilaria." The guy running the wizard character even showed up in costume. This was sacred ground. They spent the first hour recapping everything that had happened so far in the campaign. And let me tell you, it was epic.
Kingdoms had fallen.
Gods had intervened. One of the players had died and come back.
Twice.
The main arc centered around a prophesied ritual to prevent the rebirth of something called the Devourer Below. Naturally, I was going to be introduced as a mysterious stranger with crucial intel. My character enters the party at the edge of a cursed forest, where I dramatically save them from a group of shadow beasts. I deliver my monologue, complete with tortured glances and grim nods, and Greg absolutely nails the narration. Everyone seems into it. We're vibing. I'm thinking, hell yes, I found my people. Then comes the real mistake. The party needed to infiltrate a fortress belonging to the Ravenborn cult to stop them from gathering the final artifact necessary to awaken the Devourer. It was supposed to be a stealth mission. You know, sneaky, tactical, discreet. But Thorn Duskwalker? He doesn't do discreet. I misread the vibe. Or maybe I just got too into character. Or maybe I was trying too hard to make a splash. Either way, instead of sneaking through the side passage Greg had clearly designed for us, I had Thorn kick in the front gates using Eldritch Blast, shout something about vengeance for a forgotten god, and summon his packed weapon in a burst of shadow flames. There was a long pause at the table. Greg blinked at me like he couldn't believe what had just happened. Then he sighed, flipped a page in his binder, and said, "All right, roll initiative." And that's when everything went to hell. What was supposed to be a precise infiltration became an all-out war. Greg clearly had contingencies, but I had just turned a stealth encounter into a battlefield.
Guards poured in.
Alarms rang. And then the artifact, which, unbeknownst to me, was already mostly awakened, reacted to all the chaos and activated early. The Devourer below began to stir. I could see Greg dying inside as he scrambled to adapt. The players were trying to contain the situation, but we were outnumbered and unprepared. The fortress began to collapse. 2 NPC allies that had been with the group since year 1 were killed. The wizard guy in costume, remember, actually shouted at me in character, something about how my recklessness doomed the world. And it wasn't just roleplay. There was venom behind it. In the end, we had to flee. The cult succeeded in awakening the Devourer, a massive cosmic horror with a mouth that split the sky. Apparently, this was supposed to happen like 8 sessions later, with all the party's allies gathered, magical relics acquired, final boss vibes fully earned. Instead, we unleashed it mid-act like some kind of discount Marvel villain. The session ended early. Greg told us he needed to take a break and reconsider some things. Everyone kind of awkwardly shuffled out. One guy gave me a pat on the shoulder that felt like he was trying to comfort me after a funeral. I messaged Greg the next day to apologize and offer to retcon the whole thing, but he just said, "Nah, the world has changed. Actions have consequences. We'll see where the dice fall." I haven't been invited back. From what I've gathered, the group is now doing a time skip arc where their characters are older and hardened from 5 years living under the rule of the Devourer. It sounds awesome. It also sounds like they've named the apocalypse after my character, Duskwalk. I accidentally turned their epic hero's journey into Mad Max meets Eldritch Hellscape in under 45 minutes. I'm now in a different, much more casual D&D group where we spend most sessions failing at bartering with goblins. I haven't played another warlock since TIFU by accidentally sending my therapy notes to my entire office. So this happened about a week ago, and I've just now crawled out of the blanket fort of shame to share it. For context, I, 29M, started seeing a therapist a few months ago. Nothing dramatic, just your run-of-the-mill existential dread and emotional constipation. My therapist, let's call her Dr. M, suggested I start journaling between sessions to externalize the inner narrative, which is therapist speak for dump your brain into a Word doc. I took this very seriously. Every night, I wrote in this document with the unfiltered intensity of someone convinced they were writing a private novel titled Why I'm Broken, a memoir by me. Some entries were serious and tear-jerking. Others were ridiculous and borderline unhinged. One day, I wrote a 600-word rant about how I hate the sound of people chewing. Another day, I dissected my recurring dreams about being chased by giant ducks. You get the idea. Anyway, I work in marketing at a mid-sized firm. Every Friday, our team sends out a weekly wrap-up email. We each send our updates to my boss, Clara, who compiles everything and forwards it to the whole office. Last Friday, I was running late and absolutely scrambled from lack of sleep. Thanks, Duck Dreams. So I quickly exported my status update from Google Docs and emailed it from my phone. Except I didn't attach the update doc. I attached the wrong file. Guess which file I attached? Yep, the therapy journal. I didn't realize my mistake until I got the forwarded company-wide email from Clara, subject line: Weekly updates, great work team. I open it, scrolling through the usual blurbs about ad performance, campaign metrics, and upcoming client meetings. And then there it was. Asterisk asterisk from my name, asterisk asterisk. Weekly update.
And below that,
the first 3 pages of my therapy journal copy-pasted into the email. Not even a tasteful preview. The whole damn thing. The first line? Sometimes I wonder if my inability to form meaningful relationships is because I cried during Shrek 2 and nobody else did. I wanted
to die.
Page 1 was a mix of self-deprecating monologue and raw emotional overshare. Page 2? A completely unnecessary tangent on how I overthink every interaction, including a detailed breakdown of how I once high-fived someone and missed, then thought about it every day for 3 years. Page 3? The duck dream. In vivid, terrifying Freudian detail. I sat there in horror as the email loaded. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my work bestie, Tasha. Dude, you just sent your brain diary to the entire office. I panicked. I scrambled to recall the email, only to remember Gmail doesn't let you recall emails like Outlook. I considered faking my own death. I genuinely Googled how to disappear and start new life in Canada. Then the replies started coming in. First came the confused. Hey, is this the right file? Then the concerned. Hey man, if you ever want to talk, I'm here. Then the memes. Someone replied with a photoshopped image of me riding a giant duck. Someone else made a Slack emoji of my face with Shrek 2 emotional under it. One guy, who I barely talked to, messaged me a heartfelt paragraph about how he cried during Toy Story 3, and he gets it, bro. Clara, my boss, called me into her office. I thought I was going to be fired. Instead, she handed me a cup of coffee and said, I didn't read the whole thing, but are you okay? I gave her the SparkNotes version and apologized profusely. She laughed and said, honestly, half this office is in therapy. You're just the only one who accidentally live-streamed it. So yeah, I wasn't fired, but I did become an accidental mental health mascot. People started talking more openly about stress, burnout, and anxiety. One guy started a Mindful Mondays chat. Someone else asked for my therapist's contact info. I guess if you're going to overshare with 60 coworkers, it's better that it's about your deep-seated fear of emotional vulnerability than, say, an OnlyFans. But still, I'm now known as the Duck Dream Guy. They put that on my coffee mug. It's become a thing. Yesterday, someone added a motivational poster to the break room with a cartoon duck that says, chase your dreams, not your traumas. I might never live it down. I've also triple-checked every email I've sent since then. Like, click open, close, reopen, check again, levels of paranoia. Moral of the story. Never name your files weekly_update docs and emotional_purge docs in the same folder. That's just asking for it. TIFU by accidentally getting my boss fired. So this all started about a month ago, and honestly, I still can't believe how fast everything escalated. It all started innocently enough, with a few bad decisions on my part that snowballed into an absolute catastrophe. I can't even blame anyone else at this point. I messed up big time. To set the scene, I've been working at this mid-sized marketing firm for about 2 years. I'm not the highest-ranking person in the company, but I have a decent position and a good relationship with most of my colleagues, especially my boss, Greg. Greg was one of those guys who was always chill, very approachable, and never got too stressed about things. He was a great manager. He had a solid reputation for being competent and supportive, and his team always performed well. Anyway, one day, we were all in a team meeting when Greg announced that he'd be going on a 2-week vacation to Europe with his family. This wasn't anything out of the ordinary. He'd done it before. But what was a bit unusual was how relaxed Greg seemed about it. Normally, he'd be a bit worried about leaving, especially with all the projects going on, but this time he seemed totally confident that everything would run smoothly in his absence. He told us that we had a big presentation for a client coming up, but he trusted us to handle it without him. He'd be checking in from time to time, but overall, he felt good about leaving. Now, here's where things started to go south. Greg asked me, yes, me, the one with no leadership experience, to be the point person while he was gone. I'm not sure why he trusted me with this task, but he did. He said I was the most reliable person on the team, which was flattering but also terrifying. I immediately felt the weight of responsibility crash down on me, but Greg assured me that he would only be a phone call away if I needed anything. The first few days of Greg's vacation were pretty uneventful. The team was handling the regular tasks, and I was mostly coordinating things behind the scenes. But then, disaster struck. One of our biggest clients, a major tech company that we'd been working with for a few years, reached out with an urgent request. They had just had a huge setback with one of their product launches and needed us to pull off an emergency marketing campaign for them. I'm talking about a 24-hour turnaround time. Our team was under extreme pressure, but we all rolled up our sleeves and got to work. Greg had always told us to keep him updated, so I figured I'd shoot him a quick message to let him know about the new project and the insane timeline. That's where I made my first mistake. Greg was on vacation, and I should have known better than to send him an email about a new, high-pressure project. I should have just kept him out of the loop and let us handle it, but I didn't. I sent an email that went something like this. Hey Greg, hope you're enjoying your vacation. Just wanted to let you know that we've got a huge emergency project from client name, and the timeline is crazy tight. We'll handle it, but I want to give you a heads up in case you want to check in on us or need any details. I thought it was a nice, polite email, and I figured he'd just read it, maybe give me a quick reply saying, good luck, or something like that.
But no.
Instead, I got a reply from Greg about an hour later, which I should have expected considering he was one of those always-on types. His reply said something along the lines of, what the hell is this? Why didn't you run this by me before agreeing to it? You're pushing us into a corner with this, and now I have to figure out how we're going to make this work. I don't know what you were thinking. I was completely caught off guard. First of all, Greg had always been supportive, even during crunch time. He had never, in all the time I'd worked there, reacted like this. Second, he was supposed to be on vacation. He shouldn't have even been checking his emails. I mean, I didn't want to be the one to tell him that he needed to chill and take a break, but I didn't expect this level of freakout over an urgent project. I started to panic. I quickly responded, apologizing for not giving him a heads up earlier and assuring him that we were handling the situation. But Greg's tone only got sharper. He started sending emails demanding updates every hour, pointing out things that could go wrong, and generally making it clear that he was getting more and more frustrated. It felt like everything I did was being criticized, and I began second-guessing every decision I made. Then came the breaking point. The project ended up being more complicated than we expected. The client wasn't very clear about their expectations, and the tight timeline meant that there were a lot of miscommunications. I spent sleepless nights working on revisions, trying to pull everything together, while Greg was sending me passive-aggressive emails about how he didn't think we were ready and how disappointed he was in how things were going. At one point, he even sent me a long email about how unprofessional he thought the whole team was being and how he couldn't believe we were in this situation. I was so stressed out by this point that I didn't even realize how bad the situation had gotten. I was trying to cover up mistakes and push things forward, but Greg kept digging deeper into the project, making it clear that he thought we were all failing. By the time the presentation rolled around, it was a disaster. We had a half-baked campaign, the client was unhappy, and Greg was furious. Now here's where I made my second huge mistake. Instead of stepping up and owning the situation, I tried to shift the blame. I told Greg that the team had been overwhelmed and that we had communicated as best as we could, but there were issues that were beyond our control. It was a half-truth, and it didn't help that Greg was already on edge. He wasn't in the office to see the situation firsthand, and my lack of clarity and honesty made him lose trust in me and the team. The fallout was quick and severe. Greg wasn't just disappointed anymore, he was downright angry. The client wasn't happy either, and they threatened to pull their business if things didn't improve. By the time Greg returned from his vacation, it was clear that his reputation had taken a hit. He tried to salvage the situation, but it was too late. The higher-ups in the company started questioning his judgment, and before long, Greg was fired. It felt like a punch to the gut. Greg had always been there for me, and now I had played a major part in his downfall. The worst part? I didn't even mean to cause this. I thought I was just trying to manage the team and make sure everything went smoothly in his absence, but in reality, I had taken on way more than I could handle, and it cost him his job. I still feel guilty every day about it. I've tried to make things right by picking up the slack at work, but nothing feels like it can fix the damage. I still miss having Greg around as a boss, and I'll never forget how things spiraled so quickly from that one email. The moral of the story? Don't over-communicate with your boss while they're on vacation, especially when you're in way over your head. Lesson learned. TIFU by accidentally ruining my best friend's wedding day in the most embarrassing way possible. This happened a few months ago, but I've only recently been able to talk about it without completely cringing. To set the scene, my best friend Sarah was getting married, and I was her maid of honor. We've been best friends since elementary school, and she asked me to be her maid of honor years ago. I was honored, obviously, but I also knew the pressure was on. This wedding was the event of the year for our friend group, and everything had to go perfectly. I was determined to make sure it did. Now, I'm not the most graceful person. I have a bit of a tendency to trip over my own feet and say the wrong thing at the wrong time, but I really didn't think this would be the day it would all catch up with me. The day started with me arriving at the venue early. Sarah had chosen a beautiful old mansion in the countryside for the wedding. The entire place was decorated like something out of a fairy tale. I met up with the rest of the bridesmaids, and we started getting ready in one of the rooms. Things were going well. Everyone was in good spirits. Hair and makeup were going smoothly, and we had a few hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. That's when I made my first mistake. The wedding planner was running around giving us instructions, and she asked us to all line up in the order we'd be walking down the aisle. I'd already practiced this a few times, so I knew my spot was right before the bride. I was supposed to be the second to last one down the aisle, right behind the flower girl and her cute little basket of petals. Now, there's a lot of pressure as the maid of honor. You're expected to give a speech, keep the bride calm, and look good while doing it. I was already a little nervous about my speech, but I figured I could handle it. What I wasn't prepared for, however, was the enormous glass of wine that was offered to me in the waiting room. I'm not really a big drinker, but I figured a little bit of wine might help calm my nerves. I took a sip, then another, and before I knew it, the entire glass was gone. It didn't help my nerves. If anything, it made them worse. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I had another glass. I wasn't exactly drunk, but I wasn't entirely sober either. A light buzz settled over me, which made me feel a little more relaxed about everything. I felt fine, at least until the wedding ceremony started. When it was time for us to line up and start walking down the aisle, I was ready. My dress was on, my hair was perfect, or so I thought, and I had my bouquet in hand. The music began, and I watched as the bridesmaids ahead of me walked gracefully down the aisle, looking elegant and composed. It was my turn next, but then disaster struck. You see, I had been so focused on my nerves and the speech I had to give at the reception that I forgot one very important detail. I had no idea how to walk in heels. I mean, I know how to walk, obviously, but I'm not one of those people who strut around in heels every day. So when the moment came, I took a deep breath and tried to channel my inner diva. I was determined to pull this off. Big mistake. I took my first step down the aisle, and everything seemed fine. But as I took the second step, my heel caught on the edge of the rug. I tried to steady myself, but it was too late. I stumbled forward and ended up tripping on my own feet. My arms flailed around, and I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to faceplant in front of everyone. But somehow I managed to catch myself, just barely. My right hand shot out and I grabbed the arm of the groomsman next to me. Unfortunately, that's when things took an even worse turn. My hand wasn't just grabbing his arm, I was also pulling on his jacket. And with that, the whole thing came undone. The button popped off and suddenly his jacket was half off, and he was stumbling backward trying to catch himself. In the midst of my failed attempt to walk gracefully, the groomsman was now flailing behind me. And of course, the entire aisle was silent except for the sound of a loud gasp from one of the guests. I could feel Sarah's eyes burning into my back as I continued to make a fool of myself. I tried to keep walking, but I felt my balance slipping again, and I realized that the only thing keeping me from falling was the groomsman's rapidly disintegrating jacket. By this point, I was panicking. I was doing that thing where you laugh nervously because it's either that or cry. I wanted to die. It wasn't just a stumble anymore. I had somehow become the focal point of the wedding, and not in a good way. People were staring at me as I desperately tried to pull myself together. Finally, I made it to the altar, red-faced and out of breath. I stood there awkwardly, not sure where to look, feeling like I had just done the most embarrassing thing in the world. But my ordeal wasn't over. As the ceremony continued, my nerves got the best of me again. Sarah's dad gave his speech, which was touching, and I was doing my best to hold it together. But then it was time for my speech. The maid of honor speech. I stood up, tried to clear my throat, and began talking about how Sarah and I had been through everything together. Our first crushes, prom, breakups, the usual stuff. The crowd seemed to be listening, so I kept going, but then my brain just completely froze. I couldn't think of a single thing to say. My mind went blank. So I did what any rational person would do in that situation. I started talking about how I once accidentally set my kitchen on fire while trying to make dinner. I could see the confusion in Sarah's eyes as I rambled on about my cooking mishaps, and I'm pretty sure I heard a few awkward coughs from the audience. But at that point, I was just trying to fill the silence. When I finally sat down, Sarah's expression was unreadable. She smiled at me, but it was that kind of smile that says, "I love you, but what the hell just happened?" After the ceremony, things were a bit strained. The reception was nice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had ruined everything. I apologized to Sarah countless times, but she was a trooper, assuring me that everything was fine and that I was still her maid of honor. Deep down, though, I could tell I had made her day a lot more stressful than it needed to be. And that's the story of how I somehow managed to ruin my best friend's wedding in the most embarrassing way possible. It wasn't my finest moment, but I'm hoping that with time, the whole fiasco will just become one of those stories that we laugh about when we're old and gray. Until then, I'll just try to avoid weddings for a while. TLDR, I tripped, almost ruined a groomsman's suit, and gave a maid of honor speech about setting my kitchen on fire during my best friend's wedding.
It was a disaster.
TIFU by accidentally crashing my friend's wedding with a totally inappropriate gift. So, a few weeks ago, my life went from being relatively normal to absolutely chaotic in about 24 hours, all thanks to an ill-thought-out decision and a complete lack of common sense. It's still hard for me to believe what happened, and to be honest, I'm writing this in the hopes that if I can laugh about it now, maybe I can eventually convince myself that I didn't irreparably ruin everything. Let me set the scene. My best friend, let's call him Mike, was getting married. We had been friends since childhood, and we had always been close. In fact, we were so close that we had shared a ton of life events together, high school graduation, college shenanigans, and even each other's breakups. So naturally, I was invited to his wedding, which was set to be the social event of the year in our little town. Now, Mike and his fiancée, Sarah, are a great couple. I have always thought they were perfect for each other, and their wedding was shaping up to be the kind of event you read about in magazines. Gorgeous venue, fancy catering, and a band that could actually play music without making you wish you were deaf. It was going to be a classy affair, which I probably should have taken as a hint that I should temper my usual antics. I should probably mention that I've never been great at understanding the normal way to gift things for major life events. Birthdays? I'm fine. Christmas? No problem. But weddings? I mean, come on. The registry, the traditional gifts, the custom towels with monograms, it's all so formal. I knew Mike and Sarah had a registry, but I didn't want to get them something boring like a toaster or a vase. I thought, I'll get them something unique. Something unforgettable. That's when I came up with the idea. If there's one thing that Mike and I have always bonded over, it's our mutual love for movies. We would spend hours watching films, discussing obscure details, and reenacting iconic scenes. And so, in my infinite wisdom, I decided that the best wedding gift would be a life-size cardboard cutout of a celebrity. But not just any celebrity. No, I went for the ultimate statement. I got a life-size cardboard cutout of Nicolas Cage dressed as the character he played in National Treasure. I thought it would be hilarious, totally out there, but still thoughtful in its own weird way. Plus, I imagined it would be a funny talking point at their new house. Imagine them opening the front door to see Nicolas Cage standing there. How could they not love it? In hindsight, I realized this was a terrible idea, but at the time, I was convinced it would be the gift of the century. It was big, it was loud, and it was definitely a conversation starter. I even wrapped it up in a giant box, so it was a complete surprise. When Mike and Sarah would see it, I thought they would laugh, thank me profusely for being so creative, and maybe even send me a picture of it in their living room, proudly displayed next to their more traditional furniture. The day of the wedding arrived, and everything was going smoothly. The venue was stunning, and I could tell Mike was nervous, but in that, I'm about to marry my soulmate way, not the, oh God, I might mess this up way. I arrived at the venue with my gift in tow, hoping that my quirky contribution would be the highlight of the night. I even joked with a few of the other guests about how epic this gift was going to be. The ceremony was beautiful. Mike and Sarah exchanged their vows, and I was genuinely touched by how perfect they looked together. I even got a little choked up during the vows, though I would never admit that to anyone. As the ceremony ended and we all headed to the reception, I was practically vibrating with excitement. It was time for the grand reveal of my gift. I waited for the right moment, when everyone was gathered and enjoying drinks, and then I proudly wheeled my giant box into the center of the room. I could see Mike's face light up when he noticed it. He knew it was from me. Everyone was gathered around, waiting to see what I had gotten them. All right, Mike, Sarah, I said, trying to sound nonchalant but definitely feeling the buzz of adrenaline. You're going to love this one. It's a gift like no other. With a flourish, I ripped off the wrapping paper and pushed the box open. The cardboard cutout of Nicolas Cage, in all his glory, emerged from the box. The room went silent for a moment. Then the awkwardness began. First, there was a slight chuckle from a distant cousin of Sarah's. Then, a nervous giggle from one of Mike's old college buddies. But the laughter didn't grow. It shrank. No one seemed sure if I was joking or if I was being completely serious. Mike stared at the cutout, his face turning a color I can only describe as a blend of confusion and horror. Thanks, man, he said slowly, clearly trying to keep it together. But I could see it in his eyes. He didn't know what to make of it. Sarah, on the other hand, was absolutely stone-faced. She didn't even crack a smile. I could see her glance nervously around the room, and I could practically hear the collective thoughts of the guests. What the hell is this? At that point, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the best idea. But I tried to salvage it by offering an explanation. Guys, I thought this would be hilarious. You know, as a fun, quirky gift. It's Nicolas Cage. National Treasure. The crowd remained largely unresponsive, except for a few awkward coughs and sidelong glances. I could feel myself sinking lower and lower into the floor. Mike was still trying to make light of it, but it was clear he was uncomfortable. He didn't want to make a scene on his wedding day, so he tried to steer the conversation back to the other guests, but Sarah was visibly upset. I tried to apologize, but it was no use. I didn't have a good excuse for why I thought this was a good idea, and no amount of rationalizing was going to undo the damage. After the awkward gift exchange, I tried to hide in a corner and nurse my drink, hoping the night would get better. To make matters worse, things only escalated when Mike's mother found out about the gift. She was horrified, and apparently, Sarah was equally mortified. The rest of the evening was filled with small, uncomfortable interactions where people subtly avoided eye contact with me, and I could sense that no one was actually enjoying themselves as much as they had been before my ill-fated gift. The wedding eventually came to an end, and I was among the first to leave, eager to escape the inevitable judgment and lingering awkwardness. I haven't spoken to Mike or Sarah much since that night. I've tried to text Mike a few times, but the responses are always short and polite, nothing like the usual banter we used to have. I'm still not sure if they'll ever forgive me. So, that's my story. I tried to be the fun guy who gave a memorable gift. Instead, I became the guy who crashed his best friend's wedding with a life-size cardboard cutout of Nicolas Cage. It's safe to say that my gift was less of a treasure and more of a national disaster. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.